I want you to imagine that you are at a place where your parents could not give you what you needed anymore. Like, your parents were there, but then suddenly you're at a place where their ability to provide for you is gone. And the only option for you was really to be adopted by somebody. What would be characteristics of the family that you would want to adopt you? I want you to think through that for a minute. What would be some characteristics of someone that you would want to adopt you? I had a few come to my mind. Some things that came to my mind. I would want the person who adopted me to treat me like their own. Like, I would want them to look at me and love me. I wouldn't want to feel second rate to any of their other children. I would want to feel like I am one of theirs. I would want to feel so important in that household. I would also want someone who is there for me when I need them. For example, like when I was growing up and even today, when I needed something, my dad and I would sit there and talk about things. And we could be very, very vulnerable with each other. And I can remember as a kid growing up, we'd be riding in the car and I would say, Dad, I'm struggling with this. And he would walk me through some of it. And then there were days where he would be like, man, I've been really struggling with this type of thing recently. And I would love, if I were to be adopted by somebody, to have it be somebody who is going to be there for me when I needed them. I would want to be considered part of the family. In a way that everyone in the family is like, you're a part of who we are. I would want, this maybe sounds a little bit crazy, I would want even to sit there and say, I think the inheritance, I would want to be a part of that, not simply because of the money that's involved, but simply because that would mean that I am truly a part of the family and looked at as one of their own. I want to ask the question, if you were to sit there and you needed to be adopted, what are some characteristics of someone you would want to adopt you? Throw some things out there that you thought of. Yeah.
I would want them to be patient with me after what I just went through, because there's bound to be misunderstandings and hard things that happen in the beginning.
Oh, patience, because I just went through something. I'm going to need patience there. Yeah, what else? Yeah, Hollis.
I want them to either be part of the same religion as me, or respect my religion and allow me to continue as a Christian.
That's interesting. So you're sitting there and you're at a place where it's I don't want to have my faith to be disrespected by the family. That's really, really a great thought. What else? What are some other things? Or maybe we kind of went through a bunch of them already. Oh, yeah.
I think also that they're not neglectful in a busy way, where they're always at work or always have something to do that takes them away from the family.
Yeah, I want them to have time for me. And I don't want to feel like I'm the 18th priority, right? Yeah.
For it not to have been shoved on them.
Yes. It's their choice. It wasn't forced. Hey, you've got to do this. This is your only option. All right, I guess we'll take them. Yeah, they want to sit there and be like, we want this. We want to make this decision. Here's the reality. Keep these things in your mind as we go through tonight. There is, as we think about who we are in our lives, there's not a single parent on this earth who can do the things that we fully need for the eternity of our lives. We all, if the Lord wills the time for us in our life, are going to grow up and we're going to live our own lives and we're going to make our own money and we're going to leave our parents' household and we're going to do our own thing. However, that doesn't mean that we're ever going to be at a place where we don't need a father spiritually. And I want us to keep these things in our mind tonight, okay? What would I want from somebody who's adopting me if I needed to be adopted? And as someone who is a spiritual individual, I need a father who is in my life. Keep those things in mind as we dig into this passage tonight. Okay, so here we are, Romans chapter 8. We've been building in this idea really all throughout Romans, and then in the beginning of Romans 8, that is this battle that we all face. That is this kind of difference between the spirit and the flesh. The spirit and the flesh. And last week we spent a lot of time talking about this idea of, okay, we want our minds to be minds that think on the Spirit, because that is so talked about. And let's have this question for us. Last week we challenged you guys with 3 things, okay? We challenged you to take the first step, even if it's hard, to take 30 minutes at one point during the week and learn something new about God, Jesus, or the Bible, and then choose one of the fruits of the Spirit and do one thing with that fruit every day. So this is what we looked at all last week, was that difference in flesh and spirit, and we challenged you to do this. I want to just ask, how did this go? What are some things that, like, when you look back on this week, out of these 3 things, that you were like, that really was good for me this week? I want to hear kind of some thoughts on what that was. In this part of the class answered some things that they did this week to live out the challenge that was before them. Let's get to the end of that section. So there are some things that you guys did. If you guys didn't do some of these, I really challenge you to, like, when we give you guys a challenge, take it on, live it out. Like, don't let it be just something we talk about, right? Here's the thing. Remember what it said, and look back at chapter 8, verse 5. This was this context that we have to sit here and realize. Verse 5, for those who live according to the flesh set their minds on things of the flesh, but those who live according to the Spirit set their minds on things of the Spirit. As a matter of fact, in this entire 1 through 11 of chapter 8 that we studied last week, the idea of flesh versus spirit was talked about was talked about 6 times in verses 1 through 11 of chapter 8. Whereas, like, flesh equals death, spirit equals life. If you find yourself in a place where you have a really hard time setting your minds on things of the Spirit, like you look at your this week where we intentionally had a goal and you were reminded of it multiple times throughout the week, and you're like, I don't really want to set my mind on things of the Spirit. There's a really good chance your mind is set on things of the flesh, and that means that the result of that is going to be death. Paul doesn't use this repetitiveness, and he's about to say it again in verses 12 and 13. He doesn't use the repetitiveness because he's out of ideas. That's not what he's doing. He's not like, I'm going to go here and I'll say it, and I thought it sounded pretty good, so we're just going to keep on rolling with it. He says it because he's like, this is key. If you can be a person who thinks in the Spirit, who dwells in the Spirit, who lives in the Spirit, your life will be transformed entirely. We talked a lot about, as we studied this book, that there's some of those, like, crucial moments that hit where it's like, if you can't get through this, like if you can't understand faith like this, if the baptism thing isn't going to work out for you, like if you can't get past these major moments, the rest of it doesn't matter. And at this point, Paul's like, okay, set your mind on things of the Spirit, because things of the flesh are death. Verse 12, like we mentioned, continues this thought. Check it out. It says, so then, brothers, we are debtors not to the flesh to live according to the flesh. Okay, the Christian Standard Bible says it like this. So then, brothers and sisters, we are not obligated to the flesh to live according to the flesh. It's like you're living in the flesh, but you don't have to live in the flesh. That's not how this works. Verse 13, for if you live according to the flesh, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death, notice that, by the Spirit you put to death the deeds of the body, you will live. All right, that's the 7th time he's brought up this concept in the first 13 verses of Romans chapter 8. Don't let it get past you. Don't let it slip by. He's setting all of these things up for, like, this really exciting crescendo that we get to in like the next couple verses, okay? We're only looking at a few verses tonight because it's so awesome. Look at verse 14. For all who are led by the Spirit of God are sons of God. All who are led by the Spirit of God are sons of God. Now, let that sink in as to what that means. If I am somebody who allows myself to be Spirit-led, I am considered a child of God. Now, once again, he's just given us all the contradicting things. If my mind is on the flesh, then I'm not being led by the Spirit. So he says, okay, you're God's child if you're Spirit-led. And we, I think, sometimes sit here and take this idea of being children of God, and we're like, okay, yeah, whatever, I'm a child of God, right? Like, we hear that all the time. We're used to that phrase. I don't think like if I were to be like, hey, who's a child of God in this room? Like those of us who are baptized believers would be like, oh, yeah, I'm a child of God. And we're just like, yeah, sure. We're God's children. Jesus loves the little children, right? We think about this from a very early age. But I want us to really dwell on this idea, on what it means to be a child of God. And he builds on this. Look at it as he continues in verse 15. For you did not receive the spirit of slavery to fall back into fear. Okay, I want us to stop here. I love how he talks about this idea of fear. Do you remember when you were younger and you got scared, how you would go to your parents? Like I remember being like young, right? Like 2, 3, 4, 5 years old. And when it got dark, just be like I would be sitting there and I'd start to shake and shiver. And I'd be like, I'm very scared about what could come get me. And I'd be like, Mom, Dad, and like run into their room. You guys know this feeling? Or remember this feeling? I hope you don't still know this feeling. Maybe you do. But like, do you remember this feeling, right? Or like, if you were out in public somewhere and you were like, I don't know where I am. And your parent reached down and grabbed your hand and you were like, yes, thank you. Like, this is very nice. I remember when I was in Nashville, we had this thing called the Adventure Science Center. And it was like where you could adventure through science. It was awesome, especially for a homeschooled kid. But like, it was tremendous. And I remember going and I was playing, having the best time of my life, and had this big model heart you could crawl through. I'm telling you, it was awesome. And I remember like crawling through the heart and coming out on the other side, and like I couldn't find my mom anywhere. And I started to panic. Have you guys ever been like in that spot? Like, or do you remember being in that spot where like you got separated from your parent and you're like, I don't know what to do. Like I'm panicking. And I ran around and then I saw my mom and it was like, whew, like there's a peace that comes over me in that moment. He's saying, look, you didn't become God's child. You didn't become a Christian to be like, oh, hey man, I'm just going to let go of your hand and go do my own thing. Like, don't fall back into that fear of the world. You're a Christian so that you can hold his hand and let him walk through. Let's start at the beginning of 15 and let the whole verse sink in. For you did not receive the spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you have received the spirit of, what's that next word? But you have received the spirit of what? I heard it. Someone say it. Adoption. You've received the spirit of adoption as sons, by whom we cry, Abba, Father. Guys, this is beautiful. This is not some simple title that we wear where it's like, oh yeah, I'm a child of God. And it's simple and easy. This is not something that's a simple title. This is a life-changing moment that happens when I decide to be a person of the Spirit. The word Abba is an Aramaic word that a child would have used to talk to their father. It would be like the way a small child in our culture would say like dada or daddy or something like that. Like one of those names that when you're little, it's like the thing that you say to your parent. It's only used 3 times in Scripture, so it's worth noting, right? It's used in Romans and Galatians in a very similar sense. So the passage in Galatians is communicating a very similar thing to that we see here in Romans. The other time is a place where Jesus used it. And this is where I think this like starts to get really cool. Keep your finger in Romans 8, but flip back to Mark 14 for just a quick moment. Mark 14 is going to kind of let us dwell through this idea and see what he's inviting us into in Romans 8. That's like, yo, this is incredible. So Mark 14 is as Jesus is about to go to the cross, he's in the garden praying as he's about to die. And look at what he says in verse 34 through 36. Verse 34 through 36, he says, and he said to them, my soul is very sorrowful, even to death. He's talking to the apostles here. Remain here and watch. And going a little farther, He fell down on the ground and prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. He's in this very intimate moment of prayer with God in misery. And he said, verse 36, Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Remove this cup from me, yet not what I will, but you will. Jesus is miserable. He is at a place where he's about to have the cup of wrath, God's wrath, poured out upon him so that the world can be saved from sins. He's about to be separated from God. He's about to experience something unimaginable. And he looks at God and says, Abba, Father. Like a young child calling out to their father when they're in need. He's scared, he's stressed, but he says, your will be done through all of this. Romans 8 says, look, you as Christians, people who have a spirit mindset, are individuals who now, which is different than God's people have been all along leading up to this point, get to call God by an intimate child-to-father name because he adopted us into his family. This is not usual. This is astounding that he's invited us into this type of relationship with him. The same relationship that Jesus has with him. We're in a place right now as people who are living in this earth where we look at our spiritual selves, and Romans has just built this idea consistently in chapter 7. It built it in chapter 3, that there's nothing a human being can do to save themselves. There's no good spiritual option except God looks at you and says, let me bring you into my family. Let me change your life forever. Verse 16, he says, the Spirit himself bears witness with our spirit that we are children of God. He says, look, you are a true child of God. The Spirit bears witness to this. We talked about bearing witness several weeks back about this idea of what it looks like to bear witness, and what if God was bearing witness about your prayers. Sit here and think about this. If the Spirit is bearing witness with our spirit that we are children of God, the Spirit of God is looking at us and saying, you are living in me, therefore you're connected to God. You're a true child of God. But then look at verse 17 here. He says, and if children, then heirs. Heirs of God and fellow heirs with Christ, provided we suffer with him in order that we may also be glorified with him. Oh. He sits here and says, guess what? When you're adopted into my household, you're next in line. You're an heir just like Jesus is. You're elevated to that point of like prince or princess. Does that like hit us? Does that like, whoa, like I'm sitting there next to God like Jesus is? I'm an heir? Like this blows my mind every time I read it. And the Spirit inspires Paul to write, if you're living the Spirit, in the Spirit, God has adopted you as his child, and you get to join in as an heir with Jesus. Man, how incredible is that? And I sit here and I'm like, man, how do I get that? I want to be in the same room as Jesus. I want to be considered a part of God's family in the way that Jesus is. Is it free? No. What's the end of verse 17 say? It says, provided we suffer with him in order that we also may be glorified with him. This is where this gets intense tonight, right? Like we have a chance to be an heir with Jesus, the perfection of adoption, the equal treatment that God gave Jesus, his son, if we decide that we're willing to suffer with Jesus. There's this like moment here that's like, hey, this is what it takes. I want to ask this question, and this is not a trick question. I just want you to throw things out. When you think about the way Jesus suffered, what are the things that come to mind? What are the ways? Yeah, throw it out there.
Public humiliation.
Public humiliation. What else?
Actual pain, like the nails in his hands and stuff, and like the thorn crowns.
Yes, physical pain in every way. Yeah. Mocking. Absolutely. What else? What are other ways that Jesus suffered? Yeah.
Betrayal.
Betrayal. Yeah.
I'd say his own emotional pain, because I feel like I've seen a lot of people like go down a route that he didn't want for them.
Emotional pain. Yeah, Connor Thompson I read earlier where he sat there and looked at someone and just felt this immense compassion for them. He felt a lot of emotional pain. What are other things? What are other ways Jesus suffered? And also, like, he looks at people who are sinning and says, I don't want that for you. Yeah, absolutely. Great point. What are other ways that Jesus suffered? Guys, think of anything else? Adults, y'all want to throw anything in here that's on your mind? If you don't have anything, that's okay.
He cried out in thirst.
Thirst. Yeah. Just sitting there thirsty because he was being tormented. I think about the way his family rejected him. Think about what Jesus went through. Think about all those things. Romans 8:17 says, you are a fellow heir with Jesus if you suffer in the same way that Jesus did. Tonight we ask the question, do you suffer in the same way that Jesus did? Like when you look at your life, do people at school dislike you because you've chosen to be a holy life and be vocal about it? Have you lost followers and lost likes on social media because you haven't bowed to a social media trend or a social media appearance? Have you been uncomfortable talking to somebody at school because they're super outside of your social realm? Hollis felt that. It was awkward, right? Have you felt that though? Do your friends who maybe go to other churches who are okay with just like doing whatever you want sometimes when you're outside of church, do they look at you and say, your church is weird, you care so much about what the Bible says, you take it too seriously? Look, I don't know what your life looks like at school. I don't know what decisions you're making on a day-to-day basis. But what I do know is that there's something really beautiful that's being said here. And it's saying, if I choose to suffer with Jesus, choose that humiliation, choose maybe, even if it's not physical pain, choose emotional pain in a lot of ways, choose to be outcast from people, choose to be betrayed by people I thought I could trust. If I am willing to choose that, then God will be the Father that it's hard for me to imagine having. He will be a Father that is unimaginable. I asked this question today, what would your life look like if you let the promise of inheritance change your life? What would your life look like tomorrow if you let the promise of inheritance change your life? We talked about this idea of at the beginning of what type of family would you want to be adopted into? What characteristics would you want them to have? What if, and this is an interesting question, what if the family that adopted you had $40 billion sitting in the bank? And they're like, hey, here's the deal. We have $40 billion sitting in the bank. If you just honor our family and don't go off the rails, you're going to be in line to inherit the $40 billion. Would you have a hard time staying inside the rails? Probably not, right? Like you're sitting there like, I've got to do this certain thing. So I can get that. How would your world change tonight if you started processing the eternal inheritance in the same way that maybe we sometimes process an earthly one? But here's what I think that is even bigger than that. I want you to imagine that every single one of us sitting in this room right now said, okay, starting right now, I'm only going to allow myself to focus on an eternal inheritance, and this idea of suffering with Jesus is something that I am going to sit there and take on. And everyone in this room really took that as their personal mission. I think that this 80 by 28 goal would be too small. Like, I think it wouldn't be practical. As a matter of fact, I think that idea of everybody feels love would immediately happen. There would be not a single person who could walk in this room and not feel an abundance of love. I think that who we are will be people who are seeking Jesus and having a culture of seeking Him and His church. I think that we would be a people who are connected and unified in every single way. And like I already said, that 80 by 28, it'd be like, man, we're at 180 by 28. We're at 100 extra people of that. Tonight, allow yourself to think, have your mind set on things of the Spirit, and celebrate the joy of being adopted into His family so that we can be glorified with Him one day.